There are moments in life when it feels like everything is falling apart. You lose a job you depended on. The relationship you prayed for ends. The diagnosis you never expected comes knocking. And in those quiet, painful moments when hope seems like a distant dream, you find yourself asking, why, God? Why now? Why me? But let me tell you something powerful today. Your setback is not the end. It's a setup for a miracle. You see, God never wastes pain. He never allows a storm unless he plans to use it for something greater. Every great move of God in the Bible was preceded by a moment that looked like disaster. Remember Joseph. He was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. It looked like a complete failure. But what the enemy meant for evil, God used for good. God was setting Joseph up to save a nation. Or take Moses. He was raised in Pharaoh's palace, then exiled to the wilderness for 40 years, a prince turned fugitive. But God was not done. That wilderness wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Moses would return not just as a man, but as a deliverer. The Red Sea didn't part until they stood at the edge of the impossible. So if you're standing at the edge right now, if you're staring at something that seems unmovable, unbearable, unchangeable, I want you to lift your eyes. Don't mistake delay for denial. Don't confuse silence with absence. God is working behind the scenes. Your tears are not unnoticed. Your prayers are not unheard. You may feel crushed, confused, and abandoned, but you're still in the hands of a God who parts seas, moves mountains, and brings dead things back to life. The setback you're in right now, it's not the full picture. It's the beginning of a testimony. It's the soil where the seeds of a miracle are being planted. And sometimes God allows us to hit rock bottom so we realize that he is the rock at the bottom. In fact, it's in your lowest valley that God often reveals his highest purpose. Maybe you've been praying for escape, but God is preparing you for endurance. Maybe you've been asking him to remove the storm, but he's strengthening your faith to walk through it. Miracles often come when we've run out of options, when we've exhausted all strength. Why? Because when the miracle happens, there will be no doubt who gets the glory. It won't be your talent, your degree, or your network. It will be the undeniable hand of God. Sometimes he lets the door close so you'll stop knocking on the wrong one. Sometimes he lets people walk away so that he can enter the room. Sometimes the job ends because he's calling you to your real assignment. Sometimes the worst thing that ever happened to you is the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to you. You see, the cross looked like the ultimate setback. It looked like defeat, loss, humiliation. But it was a setup for the greatest miracle in human history: resurrection, redemption, restoration. So if you're broken right now, if you're tired of trying, if you feel forgotten, lean in. Trust God even when you can't trace him. Worship when you feel weak. Pray when it feels pointless. Keep walking because there's a miracle waiting on the other side of your obedience. And one day you will look back and say, that storm made me stronger. That trial led me deeper. That setback showed me a side of God I never would have known otherwise. Your setback is not the end of your story. It's the very page where the miracle begins. There are times in life when nothing seems to make sense. You prayed, you believed, you hoped, and yet the door still slammed shut. The opportunity fell through. The diagnosis came back positive. The person you trusted the most walked away. It can be confusing, heartbreaking, and at times overwhelming. In these seasons, the natural question is a why. Why would God allow such pain? Why would he permit such a setback, especially when your heart was in the right place? But what many people don't realize is that God never wastes pain. Every setback, every disappointment, every delay that comes into your life passes through the hands of a God who loves you beyond your comprehension. He sees the beginning from the end. He knows what you don't know. He sees what you can't see. And even when it feels like life is spiraling out of control, God is still in control. All throughout Scripture, there are stories of people who face devastating setbacks only to discover that those very moments were part of God's plan to bring about something much greater. Look at the life of Job. Look at the life of Job. He lost everything: his children, his wealth, his health. His friends turned on him, and his own wife told him to curse God and die. But Job's story wasn't over. What looked like a cruel setback was actually a setup for God to reveal his faithfulness in ways Job had never experienced. In the end, Job received double for his trouble. Not because he was perfect, but because he trusted God through the pain. Pain is a powerful teacher. It humbles us, it slows us down, and it often brings us to a place where we can finally hear what God has been trying to say all along. In seasons of blessing, it's easy to think we've got everything under control. But in seasons of suffering, we're reminded of just how much we need God. It's in those moments when our hearts are broken and our strength is gone that God often does his deepest work in us. He doesn't cause every pain, but he does use every pain. Not one tear is wasted. Not one sleepless night is ignored. He gathers every moment of heartache and turns it into soil for something beautiful to grow. Sometimes God will allow a door to close because he knows that what's behind it isn't his best for you. You may not understand it in the moment. It may feel cruel, like you're being punished or forgotten. But if you could see what he sees, you would thank him for every delay. What feels like denial is often divine protection. What looks like failure is often the beginning of formation. God is more interested in your character than your comfort, more committed to your purpose than your short-term pleasure. So when the door shuts, when the rug gets pulled out from under you, don't assume God has abandoned you. Instead, recognize that he's at work in ways you can't yet perceive. There are times when God allows pain, not because he's mad at you, but because he's preparing you. Think of it like a surgeon performing an operation. Cutting into the body is painful, but the purpose is healing. The wound is necessary to fix what's broken. In the same way, God sometimes allows a wound in your life because he knows that what comes on the other side will be stronger, healthier, and more aligned with your destiny. He's not trying to hurt you. He's trying to heal you in places you didn't even know were sick. The problem is that we live in a culture that wants instant answers, immediate relief, and painless success. But that's not how God works. He takes his time. He develops people in secret places. He builds strength through struggle. He forms endurance through pressure. The people you admire most, the ones with the strongest faith and deepest wisdom, didn't get there without a price. They've walked through the fire. They've sat in the shadows. They've wrestled with doubt and pain. And through it all, they've discovered a truth that only pain can teach. God is faithful even when life is not. Sometimes the very thing you're praying for, success, promotion, breakthrough, requires a version of you that doesn't yet exist. And so God allows a setback not to punish you, but to prepare you. He's shaping you into the person who can carry the blessing he has for you. If he gave it to you now, it might crush you. But after the process, after the refining, after the breaking, you'll be ready to handle it with wisdom, humility, and grace. And others will look at you and wonder how you got there. But you'll know. You'll remember the tears, the waiting, the stretching, and you'll see how God never wasted a single moment. Even the silence is part of the process. When you feel like heaven is quiet, when your prayers seem to hit the ceiling and bounce back down, trust that God is still speaking. He often does his greatest work in the silence. A seed doesn't make noise when it's growing underground. A foundation doesn't draw attention when it's being poured, but it's necessary. Without it, the structure won't stand. In the same way, God is laying a foundation in your life during this setback, one that will support the weight of the miracle he's bringing. Sometimes what feels like the most painful rejection is actually a redirection towards something far better than you imagined. You may have prayed with all your heart for a relationship to work, for a door to open, for a job to be secured, only to watch it crumble right in front of you. And it hurts. It confuses you. You wonder what you did wrong or why God would allow such a harsh outcome when your intentions were so sincere. But what we often fail to see in the moment is that God's a no is never meant to harm us. It's often a loving reroute to protect us from what we cannot yet see. When you read the Bible, you find countless stories of people who experienced rejection, not because they were unqualified or unloved, but because God was moving them into their real purpose. David was rejected by his own father when Samuel came looking for the next king. Jesse didn't even bother to bring David in from the field. He wasn't considered worthy, but the one who was overlooked by people was handpicked by God. That rejection didn't diminish David's worth. It revealed God's plan. Had David been elevated too early, he would have missed the divine training that came through the field, the lion and the bear. The rejection was simply a redirection to God's perfect timing. Rejection often feels personal, but it's rarely about your worth. It's about your alignment. God knows where your future is headed, and he also knows who and what cannot go with you. There are jobs that will drain you, opportunities that will detour you, relationships that will limit your growth, and people who will distract you from your calling, friend. And so, in his mercy, God lets certain things fall apart so you don't. It's easy to look back on the closed doors of life and thank God for what didn't work out. But while you're in the moment, it rarely feels like a blessing. It feels like loss. It feels like failure. Feels like failure. That's why it's so important to walk by faith and not by feelings. Faith says, even though I don't understand this, I trust that God is still writing my story. Feelings say, this hurts too much to be right. But when you live by faith, you start to view rejection not as a stop sign, but as a detour sign, pointing you towards something greater than you originally planned. Think of Paul in the New Testament. He had a passion to preach the gospel and tried to enter Asia, but the Holy Spirit stopped him. At first glance, that looks like rejection. A man on fire for God is turned away from where he wants to serve. But that divine redirection led him to Macedonia, where he met Lydia, planted churches, and ultimately impacted Europe with the gospel. What Paul thought was a blocked mission was actually God's strategy to expand his reach. The problem with human perspective is that it's limited. We see what's in front of us. God sees the full picture. He sees the long nights ahead that would have worn you down. He sees the compromises you would have had to make. He sees the version of you that would have settled for less simply because you were afraid to wait for more. And so out of love, he redirects you, not because he wants to withhold, but because he wants to protect and provide in a better way. When people reject you, it stings. Maybe you weren't invited. Maybe you were let go. Maybe someone you trusted stopped returning your calls. It's tempting to internalize that, to assume something is wrong with you. But what if that rejection is not about your inadequacy, but about your identity? What if God is saying, I've called you to higher ground and this can't go with you? There's something liberating about realizing that you don't have to chase people, force opportunities, or manipulate outcomes to step into your destiny. If it's from God, it will come in his way, in his time, and it will align with his peace. And if it's not from him, even if you try to force it, it will fall apart. That's not failure, it's grace. So many people are stuck in frustration over something that didn't go their way, not realizing that what feels like the end is actually a transition. You didn't lose your purpose, you just lost your plan. And God's purpose is always greater than your plan. He's not trying to punish you by closing doors. He's trying to push you into something better. Every rejection removes what doesn't belong until all that's left is what God intended for you all along. This is why rejection can be a holy gift. It clarifies your path. It reveals what was never meant to be permanent. It forces you to trust God over your own understanding. And it opens your heart to receive blessings that your original plan couldn't have handled. There are seasons in life when the weight of everything feels unbearable. You're doing your best to hold it all together, to stay strong, to keep moving forward, but the ground beneath you keeps shifting. People you trusted walk away. Prayers go unanswered. Plans fall apart. Dreams are delayed. Dreams are delayed. And in the middle of it all, you find yourself in the lowest valley you've ever known. Emotionally, spiritually, even physically. It's dark, it's quiet, and it's lonely. This is not the mountaintop. This is the place where your strength ends and your questions begin. What if this valley you're walking through isn't the end? What if it's the entry point into your purpose? Over and over in Scripture, God meets people in valleys long before he lifts them to the mountaintop. And the valley isn't a punishment. It's a place of preparation. It's where God strips away everything that doesn't belong. It's where he quiets the noise of the world so you can finally hear his whisper. The valley is where you stop performing and start depending. Moses didn't find his calling in Pharaoh's palace. He found it in the wilderness, tending sheep in obscurity for 40 years. That wilderness was his valley, a place where he was no longer the powerful prince of Egypt, but just a man learning how to listen. That valley prepared him for one of the greatest callings ever recorded. Without the valley, there would have been no burning bush. Without the wilderness, there would have been no Red Sea miracle. God used the valley to reveal the calling. David didn't become a man after God's heart in the spotlight. He was formed in caves and lonely fields on lonely fields. He knew the pain of betrayal, the sting of being hunted, the heartbreak of personal failure. But those valleys didn't disqualify him. They shaped him. In those places of sorrow, God carved depth into David's character. The songs we now call Psalms weren't written in the palace. They were birthed in seasons of brokenness. It was in the valley that David learned who God really was, not just a distant deity, but a shepherd, a refuge, a rock, a fortress. It's easy to love God on the mountaintop when everything is going well, when prayers are being answered and doors are opening. But your relationship with God isn't truly tested on the mountain. It's tested in the valley. It's in those moments of confusion, heartbreak, and silence where you decide, will I still believe? Will I still trust? Will I still worship even when I don't understand? Sometimes your valley is the very thing that opens your eyes to the real calling God has placed on your life. You thought you were meant for one thing, but the valley reveals another. You thought your strength came from your talent, your background, your confidence, but the valley teaches you that your true strength comes from surrender. It shows you what really matters. It strips away the distractions. It humbles you. It grows you. The lowest points of your life can become the most significant turning points, not because you figured everything out, but because you discovered that God was there all along, in the pit, in the pain, in the quiet nights of despair. He was working. He was building. He was shaping. He was waiting for you to let go of your own plans and lean fully into His. Some of the greatest callings are born not in victory, but in vulnerability. When Paul cried out to God to remove the thorn in his flesh, God didn't take it away. Instead, He gave Paul something better, a deeper revelation of grace. Paul said that it was in his weakness that Christ's power was made perfect. That's what the valley does. It exposes your weakness, not to shame you, but to position you for God's strength. You may feel like everything has been taken from you. You may feel forgotten, hidden, overlooked. But being hidden is not the same as being forsaken. Sometimes God hides you to protect you. He keeps you in the valley until you're ready for the weight of what's coming. He knows the kind of character required to carry the calling. He knows what needs to be pruned before the fruit can grow. There's purpose in the pain. There's clarity in the quiet. There's destiny being developed in the dark. When Joseph sat in the prison cell, it would have been easy to assume that his dreams were dead, but the valley of the prison was necessary to prepare him for the palace. Without the valley, Joseph would not have been ready for the responsibility that awaited him. It was in that low place where he learned patience, humility, and trust. It was in the valley that his gift was sharpened. It was in the valley that he learned how to lead not from a place of ego, but from a place of compassion. The valley does not mean you've been disqualified. It means you're being deeply qualified. What's growing inside of you in the valley will sustain you when you finally stand on the mountain. The compassion, the resilience, the wisdom, the empathy, the discernment, it's all being formed in this low place. And one day, when the light shines again and you've been raised to that next level, you won't be the same person who entered the valley. You'll be stronger. You'll be wiser. You'll be more grounded. And most importantly, you'll know without a doubt that it was in the valley where God planted the seeds of your greatest purpose. There comes a time when every effort feels exhausted. You've tried every solution, spoken every prayer you could muster, sought advice, adjusted your plans, and given it all you had. And yet the situation hasn't changed. The door hasn't opened. The healing hasn't come. The breakthrough remains out of reach. It's in this place, when you've reached the end of your own strength, that God often steps in with a miracle. Because miracles don't show up when you're still in control. They arrive when you finally let go, when you've come to the end of yourself, and when all that's left is God. There's a kind of surrender that doesn't happen until your hands are empty. As long as there's a backup plan, a safety net, a second option, you're still holding on. But when every strategy has failed, when the experts have no more answers, when your strength has worn thin, that's the soil where miracles grow. Not because God enjoys watching you struggle, but because he wants you to experience what only he can do. He wants you to see his power at work in a way that leaves no room for doubt, no space for boasting, no way to give credit to anything or anyone else. In the Gospels, you find countless examples of people receiving miracles at the end of their rope. The woman with the issue of blood had spent all she had on doctors and found no cure. 12 years of suffering. She had nothing left except faith. She pushed through the crowd, touched the hem of Jesus' garment, and in that desperate moment, healing came. It didn't happen while she still had options. It happened when she had nothing left but a belief that if she could just touch him, everything would change. There was a man lying by the pool of Bethesda for 38 years. He was paralyzed, helpless, and forgotten. Every time the water stirred, someone else stepped in before him. No one helped him. No one noticed him. But Jesus did, and he didn't just heal his body. He restored his dignity. That miracle didn't happen on year 1 or year 10. It happened when he had long given up hope in the pool and unknowingly encountered the source of true healing. Miracles are not reserved for the strong. They are reserved for the surrendered. It's not about how loud your prayers are or how perfect your faith is. It's about trusting God enough to bring your empty, broken, weary self to him and say, I can't do this. I've tried. Now I need you to move. That's when God responds, not because he needs you to be powerless, but because he wants you to understand where real power comes from. There are some battles God will not allow you to win in your own strength, because if you did, you'd think it was your effort, your wisdom, your plan that saved you. But when the odds are stacked against you, when you're outnumbered, underqualified, and overwhelmed, yet somehow the outcome shifts in your favor, you'll know it wasn't you. It was him. The miracle will leave no other explanation. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them, they had no way forward and no way back. They were trapped. That's when God stepped in. Not while they were still planning or strategizing, but when they were cornered, afraid, and desperate. God parted the sea not to impress them, but to remind them that he makes a way where there is no way. Sometimes God allows situations to break you, not to harm you, but to break your self-reliance. As long as you're still leaning on your own ability, you're limited. But when you release control, when you fall into grace, when you admit that you don't have the answer, God moves in ways you couldn't have imagined. His strength is made perfect not in your confidence, but in your weakness. That's why your breaking point might actually be your breakthrough point. That moment when you finally say, I can't fix this, is the moment you're ready to see the miracle unfold. God doesn't need you to be strong. He needs you to be available. He's not waiting for you to figure it out. He's waiting for you to hand it over. The end of your resources is the beginning of his revelation. Some miracles require a waiting season. They require silence, endurance, faith in the dark. And in that waiting, your heart is being shaped. Your faith is being stretched. Your eyes are being lifted from the problem to the promise keeper. You stop looking at how big the mountain is and start remembering how faithful your God has been. And as your strength fades, his power becomes clearer. As your hands tremble, his hands hold firm. Hands hold firm. God doesn't look for perfection. He looks for surrender. And often surrender only comes when you're out of options. That's when your heart is soft enough to receive. That's when your eyes are open enough to see. That's when your spirit is quiet enough to hear his whisper. The miracle you're waiting for may not come through the path you expected, and it may not arrive in the timing you desired. But it will come when you are finally ready to receive it, not as a reward for effort, but as a gift of grace. The cross was never meant to be the end of the story. From a human perspective, it looked like total defeat. Jesus mocked, beaten, nailed to wood, and left to die between criminals. His followers scattered, Hope shattered, the sky darkened, and silence fell over the dreams of many who believed he was the Messiah. For those standing at the foot of the cross, it was the ultimate setback. Everything they thought would happen didn't. Everything they hoped for seemed lost. But what they couldn't see in that moment was that the cross was not a failure. It was a setup for resurrection. God specializes in taking what looks like defeat and turning it into destiny. The very thing that looked like the end became the beginning of salvation for all humanity. The cross was the place where sin was conquered, where grace was released, where love was proven beyond question. What looked like the greatest tragedy was, in fact, the greatest triumph. And the same God who transformed the cross into victory is the God who can transform your situation too. Sometimes in life, things fall apart so God can rebuild them on a stronger foundation. You may be looking at your own cross right now, the painful ending, the unanswered prayer, the dream that died. You might be wondering why God allowed this, why he didn't intervene, why he stayed silent while you suffered. But just like those disciples on the dark side of Calvary, you don't have the full picture yet. There's a resurrection coming. When Jesus was buried, the stone was rolled in place, and for 3 days, it seemed like hope was gone. But the silence of Saturday was not the absence of God. It was the preparation of a miracle. Heaven was not panicking. Angels were not pacing. God was setting the stage for something the world had never seen. Resurrection didn't happen in spite of the cross. It happened because of it. That pattern hasn't changed. Before the miracle comes, the moment that tests your faith. Before the breakthrough comes the breaking. Before the restoration comes the removal. It's part of how God works, not because he enjoys our pain, but because he's purifying our purpose. He allows us to go through things that seem senseless so he can reveal a strength we didn't know we had and a power we didn't know was available. Think of the disciples after the crucifixion, confused, afraid, hiding in a locked room. They had seen the miracles. They had walked with Jesus, but they didn't expect it to end like this. They thought the story was over. But on the third day, everything changed. Jesus walked out of the grave, not as a bruised and broken man, but as the victorious Savior. And what did he do? He went back to the very people who had lost hope and reignited their faith. He turned their mourning into mission. You may be in your Friday right now when everything feels like it's dying. Or maybe you're in your Saturday, the waiting period, the silent day, the place of uncertainty. But Sunday is coming, and with it comes a miracle that proves nothing is impossible with God. Don't despise your cross, because without it, there is no crown. Don't run from your setback, because it might just be the stage for your resurrection moment. God never allows pain without purpose. He never wastes a tear. Every heartbreak, every delay, every disappointment is part of a bigger picture. He sees what you don't. He knows what you can't. And he's already written the ending, an ending filled with hope, restoration, and resurrection power. You may have fallen, but you're not finished. You may feel forgotten, but you're not forsaken. The cross looked like the end, but it was just the beginning of everything good. And just like Jesus rose from the dead, you too will rise from this, not in your own power, but in his. So if you're walking through darkness, hold on. If you're facing a setback, trust him. If you're questioning the outcome, remember the cross. Because what looks like your greatest loss may be the foundation of your greatest miracle. And when the dust settles, when the stone is rolled away, when the light breaks through the darkness, you'll see it clearly. The setback was always a setup for your miracle, your breakthrough, your resurrection. Your story isn't over. God's not done. What he started, he will finish. What was broken, he will restore. And what looked dead, he will bring back to life. The same power that raised Jesus from the grave is alive in you. And that power is more than enough.